Shafika, the webinar is yours.
Salam. It is the 10th of December 2024, the International Human Rights Day. And at this time, if you are a woman in Afghanistan, this is how your life looks like. You are not allowed to attend school above grade 6. You cannot work with NGOs, UN agencies, or the public and private sectors. You're forbidden to speak loudly in the public. You're forbidden to travel without a mahram or male chaperone. You cannot be a doctor, a teacher, a journalist, a judge, or a politician. And as of last week, you cannot be a midwife, a nurse, or a dentist. Because of their recent ban, the Taliban closed all medical courses and institutions for women, which was the only educational window available for women to study above grade 6. But how do the Taliban justify all the systematic oppression of women with Islamic interpretation and Afghan culture? What is their law of vice and virtue? With some of the restrictions, the Taliban said that they would be temporary. For example, the closure of secondary education, universities, and even employment. According to the Taliban, environment in Afghanistan is not protected by Sharia law. They are working on policies to make sure women study and work in an Islamic environment. But can we honestly believe them? Or the un-Islamic environment is just a pretext that they use for their oppression? We will explore these and other vital questions in today's webinar from Islamic perspective with our brilliant scholars and experts in the field. I am Shafika Khalwag, a poet and writer and activist from Afghanistan. This excellent webinar is organized by Rawadari, Musawah, and Femena. Musawah is a global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. Since launching in 2009 in Malaysia, Musawah has built a knowledge-based global movement, bringing together activists, policymakers, and scholars to challenge the use of Islam in justifying discrimination against women in law and practice, and to offer an alternative Islamic rights-based discourse and framework to advocate for equality and justice for women living in a Muslim context. Rawadari is an Afghan human rights organization that aims to deepen and grow the human rights culture of Afghanistan, ultimately reducing the suffering of all Afghans, especially women and girls. Rawadari helps build an Afghan human rights movement, monitoring human rights violations and pursue justice and accountability for violations. Rawadari works with individuals and collectives inside and outside of Afghanistan. Femena supports women and women rights defenders and organizations and feminist movements working to promote gender equality, inclusion, peace, and democracy in MENA and Asia region, with a focus on context of closed civic space and other complex context impacted by conflict and extremism. Femena works with partners to promote gender equality, empower women, expand civic space, elevate the works of WHRDs and progressive movements, and ensure the resilience of women and WHRDs. Femena works to achieve its aim through 4 interlinked approaches: analysis of trends and policies, documentation, fostering the development of communities of practices through convening, training, technical assistance, psychosocial well-being, and other supports and advocacy. We are going to have this discussion with our brilliant scholars and experts in the field, but at the beginning, I would like you to know that we are also having Pashto and Dari translation of this webinar available. You can go to those channels, and if you want to listen to the translation, please mute the original audio so you can listen to the translation in peace. This webinar will be also recorded and published in Musawah YouTube channel. You can come later on and have a listen to that. You can also post us your questions. We will be also taking some of your questions during our discussions. In the beginning of the webinar, we would like to hear from Nazifa Jalali, who is the daughter of Gulab Shah Jalali. She's from Zabul and she currently lives in Norway. She has 2 bachelor degrees in law and business administration and semi-bachelor in Islamic Sharia, and completed a fellowship in political leadership and Norwegian literature in uh, she has worked in 34 provinces in Afghanistan. She has founded the Nazifa Handicraft Company for Women and also the Nazifa Islamic Modern Educational Center and Nazifa Khaima restaurant, which were closed on 17th of August 2021 when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. She also co-founded Charmag Media, which is registered in Norway, and is the director of Palau Design, which is working for women, for Afghan women who have small businesses. Nazifa is a member of Committee of Documented Human Rights Violation at HRD+. Nazifa has participated in negotiations with the Taliban in Doha, diplomats and politicians, and has advocated in various sessions, meetings, conferences, and dialogues in more than 12 countries. To start with this webinar and our theme of the webinar, we would like to listen to Nazifa's personal experience and understanding of Islam and Afghan culture. Nazifa Jan, the floor is yours. Mehrabani.
Thank you so much, Shafiqa Jan, for having me in this online crucial event. Today, I feel a deep sense of discomfort and disappointment because it is, as you said, December 10th, International Human Rights Day. And on this day, I'm thinking about torture, killings, arbitrary detentions, and the imprisonment of my fellow human rights defenders and my colleagues and Afghan women who are working inside Afghanistan. Yes, currently I'm based in Norway, but I'm working inside Afghanistan. And I worked in Afghanistan before the Taliban came to power. So these are the harsh realities that many of who face in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, these truths are too often overlooked and forgotten. As I reflect on this day, I'm reminded that the struggle for human rights is not just a distant concept for people in far-off lands. It is a daily fight for survival and dignity for those who are living under constant threats. The voices of Afghan women and human rights defenders are being silenced, their lives torn apart, and the world's attention drifts elsewhere. It is painful to witness these double standards, where these double standards, where the international community, the powerful people, the powerful countries speaks of human rights, but fails to act with the same urgency and compassion for those most in need. I'm currently in Berlin attending a conference, but during the conference and even now, questions keep arising in my mind. Is human rights only for developed and powerful countries? Is the color of my blood is white? Is the color of my skin in here is different? So I should be forgotten? Does the international community think that we Afghan women don't realize that they have abandoned us? And exactly the same way the Taliban treats women in Afghanistan, the international community behaves the same way outside Afghanistan. Women are pushed to the margins of important discussions. Anyway, I don't even know which truths in Afghanistan to talk about because everything is clear. Everyone knows about the situation inside Afghanistan. Everyone knows what is the situation of women and human rights defenders, civil society activists inside Afghanistan. The realities of life in Afghanistan, especially after the Taliban's return to the power, are far worse and more complex than what is often portrayed in the media. You know, I'm from south part of Afghanistan. I work there. The south part of Afghanistan, like the base of the Taliban, the base of the terrorist groups, the base of those people that they abuse Islam for their political power. They're not working for Islam. They're abusing Islam against humanity, against women, against human rights defenders inside Afghanistan. People, particularly women and human rights defenders in remote region of Afghanistan, most reporters and media's attention focus in Kabul and the larger cities. But the harsh realities in rural areas and provinces are far more danger, because the people of the remote areas, they don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to the international community. They don't have access to the international platforms. And also, as I said, for the past 2 decades, Afghanistan, especially women and human rights defenders in remote region has faced challenges. Despite some improvements, life for women in these areas has been and still is much harder than in the cities. Me, myself, as a 26 years old girl and a human rights defender from a rural province, one that was once the birthplace of Mullah Omar and is now the residence of Mullah Haibatullah. I understand these difficulties all too well. Even before the Taliban regained full control over Afghanistan, many remote districts were already under their rule, and people there were denied even the most basic human rights. Torture, imprisonment, deprivation of education, work, and participation in social and political life were everyday realities for women and human rights defenders in these areas. However, during the past 20 years, despite the challenges, efforts were made to improve the situation. Government and NGOs in the international community tried to address these challenges. But the problems were far from solved. Many of us were hopeful that with time and collective efforts, we could find a way out of this misery. Unfortunately, after the Taliban returned to the power, everything has regressed. Many of us who had money previously survived suicide attack. Personally, me, I experienced that. I experienced torture. I experienced the Taliban in prison, and still held into hope for change, are now filled with despair. Today, the situation for women in human rights in Afghanistan has reached a crisis point. Women are not only deprived of their fundamental rights, their Islamic rights. I participated in negotiations with the Taliban. I asked them, just tell me one ayah in Quran. Just tell me one reason in Islam that said the women don't have the right of education, the right of work, the right of political participation. But unfortunately, they don't have any answer for that because they are just abusing Islam. But the situation is not limited to women. Men too are facing challenges under Taliban rule. Many individuals who were once active in various fields now live under constant threats. The entire Afghan society is under pressure. And in this climate, human rights defenders, especially those who stand against injustice, are under risk. Over the past 3 years, reporters of human rights organizations such as Richard Bennett and others have clearly documented the human rights situation in Afghanistan. These reports point a grim picture of life for ordinary people in the country.
Thank you, Nazifa Jan. We will come back to you. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and thoughts. And as a reminder to our viewers that you are watching our webinar organized by Musawah, Rawadari and Femena, we are discussing human rights from Islamic perspective and challenging Taliban's Islamic interpretation. And as I've mentioned in the beginning, we have brilliant scholars and experts with us. And in this section, we will turn to Dr. Mustafa Sheikhs, who holds a degree in Arabic and Islamic law, an MST in the study of religion from the University of Oxford, a PhD in theology from the University of Oxford, having previously taken a degree in project management at University College London. He has been a member of Arabic, Islamic, and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Leeds since 2009 and has held visiting positions at Bangor University and Austin Business School. Professor Mustafa, welcome to the program. We are very keen to hear your initial remarks. Professor Mustafa?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Unsur akhaka zaliman aw mazluman. Help your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the one oppressed. The companions asked him, O Messenger of Allah, we would help the oppressed, of course, but an oppressor, how do we help him? The Prophet ﷺ said, by preventing him from oppressing others, for that is how to help him. Based on sound testimony from Afghan women representing all ethnic, class and religious groups in Afghanistan, and based on the evidence collected by human rights organizations, it's abundantly clear that Afghan women, either in totality or as a majority, are being subjected to discrimination, subjugation, gender apartheid, and dehumanization. Given the Taliban's religious framing and justification for this system of oppression, it is a duty for scholars of Islam to respond, both to correct misinterpretations of Islamic law, legal principles, and the Islamic scriptural sources, and to call out the systemic oppression of more than half of the population of Afghanistan, namely its women and girls. This oppression and cruelty runs counter to the way of the believers, and most importantly, counter to the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our Prophet's interactions with women reflect his profound respect for their humanity, dignity, intelligence, and contributions to society. His deference to their wisdom in critical moments highlights the inclusive and consultative nature of his leadership. Such examples serve as timeless lessons for appreciating and empowering women in all aspects of life. I'll focus on some examples of this from his blessed seerah. First, respect for women in his personal life. Let us look at his love and partnership with Khadija radiallahu anha. Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the Prophet's first wife, was not only his spouse, but also his confidant and supporter during the most critical periods of his life. When the Prophet received his first revelation, he turned to Khadija in fear and uncertainty. She reassured him, saying, by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. You maintain ties of kinship, bear the burdens of others, help the poor and needy, and assist those afflicted by calamity. Her financial support and belief in his mission enabled the early growth of Islam, so there is little wonder in the Prophet's trust in her wisdom and partnership. In terms of deferring to women on political decisions, we can look at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. During this treaty, the companions of the Prophet were deeply disheartened when the terms of the treaty seemed unfavorable to the Muslims. Despite his instructions, they hesitated to carry out the symbolic act of shaving their heads and sacrificing their animals. Salama, the Prophet's wife, offered him wise advice. She suggested that he lead by example. "Ukhrij ya Rasulallah, thumma la tukallim ahadan minhum hatta tanhara hadyaka wa tahliq ra'sak." Go out and do not speak to anyone until you have sacrificed your animal and shaved your head. The Prophet followed her advice, and the companions, seeing his action, immediately followed suit. This diplomatic resolution ultimately proved to be a turning point for Islam. In terms of shura, consultation with women, the Prophet included women in key consultations. For example, in the aftermath of the Battle of Uhud, when morale was low, women like Fatima and Sulaym played active roles in advising the community. Similarly, during the Constitution of Medina, women were part of the cohesive community framework that shaped the political and social policies of the nascent Muslim state. In terms of recognizing women's leadership and capabilities, the Prophet gave full endorsement of women's participation in public life. He allowed women to attend the mosque, to participate in religious, educational, and even military activities. Nusayba bint Ka'b, known as Ammara, was a distinguished warrior who fought in the Battle of Uhud. She defended the Prophet ﷺ when the tide turned against the Muslims. Using a sword and shield, she sustained multiple wounds while protecting him. The Prophet ﷺ reportedly said, "Ma iltafattu yaminan wala shimalan yawma Uhud illa wa ana araha tuqatil duni." Wherever I turned during the battle, I saw her fighting to defend me. Lest anyone claim that this is a dispensation for a woman in exceptional circumstances and is not to be taken as normative, this same Nusayba also participated in the Battle of Yamama during the Caliphate of Abu Bakr against Musaylama al-Kadhdhab. The Prophet's acknowledgement of women's knowledge and wisdom is exemplified in his appreciation for Aisha bint Abi Bakr's scholarship. Aisha became a leading scholar of Islam, narrating over 2,200 hadith. The Prophet often praised her intelligence and memory, referring to her as a source of knowledge for the Ummah. In terms of upholding women's rights, in inheritance and legal rights, in a society where women were denied inheritance and other legal rights, the Prophet instituted reforms that granted them their due shares in inheritance and established their right to own property. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Ustawsu bin nisa'i khayran, fa innahunna awanun indakum." Treat women kindly. They are your partners and committed helpers. The Prophet's way was to allow every member of his community to live full and dignified lives, actualizing every aspect of their humanity. He stood firm against oppression and discrimination and endorsed any initiative seeking to protect the rights of individuals and communities, even when these were led by non-Muslims. Take his praise of the Hilf al-Fudul, an alliance formed in Mecca before the advent of Islam. This pact was initiated by prominent Meccan leaders to uphold justice and protect the oppressed, regardless of tribal affiliations or social status. The catalyst for the pact was a case where a man from Yemen was wronged by a Qurayshi trader and was unable to get justice. In response, the pact members vowed to ensure that the rights of the oppressed were upheld. Even after the advent of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ expressed admiration for this agreement. He said, "I witnessed an alliance in the house of Abdullah ibn Jud'an that was more beloved to me than a herd of red camels. If I were invited to it in Islam, I would join it." By stating that he would join a similar pact even after the advent of Islam, the Prophet affirmed that Islam upholds universal principles of fairness, justice, and the defense of the weak. It further illustrates that alliances and agreements based on ethical principles are commendable, even if they originate outside the framework of Islamic law. This serves as a timeless example of the Islamic commitment to justice and equity. Today, 189 countries have ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, including the majority of Muslim countries, making it one of the most widely endorsed UN human rights treaties. Members that have agreed to the convention's dispute mechanism can challenge other members over alleged breaches of the convention. Afghanistan is a signatory. The Taliban, who are now liable for Afghanistan's commitments under international treaties, have created a situation in which Afghanistan has become the only country in the world where girls are banned from secondary and higher education, while imposing a series of draconian restrictions on women, including bans on their employment, political participation, and even their presence in public. Their movement from the home is constrained, and there is a prohibition on their voices being heard and their faces being seen in public spaces. These policies contravene Afghanistan's obligations under the convention. It is for this reason that international human rights lawyers are urging other CEDAW member states to join the bid to invoke the convention against the Taliban's record of abuse and to ensure a central role in the process for Afghan women. They want to hold the Taliban accountable for Afghanistan's treaty obligations to protect the rights of women, and an effort that follows the courageous leadership and resistance of Afghan women themselves who continue to fight for their rights in the face of oppression. We as an ummah, responsible for every single one of our members, must also ensure a path towards a more sustainable future for Afghan women. We must show them in word and deed that they are neither forgotten nor ignored, and they will be supported in every way, materially and morally, in their pursuit of justice, fairness, equality, and freedom. The Taliban have exceeded all bounds of justice and freedom and attempted to legitimize their oppression of women by citing Islamic law. I say, fear God, who warns, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, la taghlu fi dinikum wa la taqulu ala Allahi illa al-haqq. O people of the book, commit no excesses in your religion, nor say of God anything but the truth. About this verse, the great Mufassir Sahal al-Tustari said, and I quote, "Here God is warning us, do not exceed the limits in your religion through innovations, bid'ah, or by deviating from the truth, which is the book, the sunnah, and the consensus, ijma', by inclining towards the desire of your lower selves. The backbone, qiwam, of religion and this world is in three things: knowledge, ilm, propriety, adab, and initiative, mubadara. However, the ruin of religion in this world comes from three things: ignorance, jahl, folly, khurq, and laziness, kasal. And finally, we are warned about going against the normative practice of the believers. In this case, the ummah at large is aghast at what is happening to the women and girls in Afghanistan, especially in terms of the denial of women's education, which is tantamount to educide and femicide. What is happening in Afghanistan is nothing short of the destruction of the education system and the dismantling of women's capacity to contribute to and sustain knowledge. This is a complete departure from the way of the believing communities, the implications of which are stated clearly in verse 115 of Surah An-Nisa, which is a whole chapter entitled The Women. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصله جهنم وساءت مصيرا. But as for him who, after guidance has been vouchsafed to him, cuts himself off from the messenger and follows a path other than that of the believers, him shall we leave upon that which he himself has chosen, and we shall cause him to endure hell, and how evil a journey's end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Mustafa. Thank you for bringing out the most important points. As of now, the women in Afghanistan are banned from schools, employment, work, and even having any part in public life. They're completely erased. And in this session, we would like to listen to Professor Zeba Hosseini, who is a legal anthropologist specializing in Islamic law, gender, and Islamic feminism, and a founding member of Musawah. She's recipient of the American Academy of Religion 2015 Martin Marty Award for the Public Understanding of Religion. She has held numerous research fellowships and visiting professorships, most recently at NYU Law School, and currently she's professorial research associate at the Center for Islamic and Middle Eastern Law at SOAS University of London. She has published numerous books on gender equality, Islamic law, and family law. Professor Zeba, welcome to the program, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Shafiqa, for this kind introduction and also for the opportunity to address this important issue. I want to focus on two key points. That is the Taliban actions from an Islamic perspective, which Dr. Musawah really addressed it so beautifully and so adequately. And also about and also human rights and what can be done. And on Islamic perspective, there is no room to say much more, apart from the fact that religion of Islam is about justice, compassion, and equality. And the Quran emphasizes equal worth of our human beings, and justice is so important part of law in Islam. And there can be no law that is part of the Sharia that is unjust. So how can we justify, how Taliban dare to talk about their laws in the name of Islam? It goes against the very essence of Islam and Quran. So it's clear it is not Islamic. So I'm not going to talk about it. And also it is so clear that it is not according to any standard of human rights, international human rights, like the right to education, right to movement, right to the participation, everything women are denied. And what is more important for us to, crucial to note is that there is compatibility between human rights and Islam. There is no opposition. And both Islam and human rights share the values of commitment and dignity, commitment to justice and dignity. So there is an overlapping consensus between the two, and the policies of Taliban can be challenged very clearly and very confidently, both from Islamic and human rights. And we must also remind ourselves that, and not only ourselves, but the world, the Afghan women and girls have rights, not because the West says so. They have rights because of their faith and humanity, and their faith and humanity demands that right for them. So what can be done? And basically what I want to say that what we are facing is a deep patriarchy that is an anomaly in a modern time. Nowhere in the world you can see that patriarchy, the shape that it is imposed by the state. So despite all these challenges, Afghan women are not passive victims. They are resisting, and they have been resisting for a long time, and they have extraordinary courage. Teaching girls in secret schools, organizing online learning, and advocating for their rights under immense pressure, and they're paying a high price. Our role is to stand with them, to amplify their voices and support their efforts. What we can do here is raise awareness, share Afghan women's stories, keep their struggle visible so that the world does not look away. We must not allow the world to forget about this suffering. They must see it, and they must feel it, and they must be ashamed of it because they are partly responsible for it. Support education. Education is the most important thing. And it is actually no coincidence that Taliban has banned education for women apart from intermediary level. They want to silence them. They wanted to deprive them of the right, the most basic rights that Islam has given them, because education is something that for men and women is an obligation. This is what Prophet had said. And what we can do is to have online platforms, and we can have really underground schools, and these are lifelines. We can advocate for scholarship and funding to ensure Afghan girls continue learning, and demand action. Governments and international organizations must hold Taliban accountable. And it is really a shame that they haven't told Taliban accountable. It seems that the international community is somehow important on this issue. And this means by humanitarian aid to women's rights, and also ensuring that the aid reaches directly to women, and build alliances. Islamic scholars, activists, and policymakers must come together to show that supporting Afghan women is a shared moral and spiritual responsibility. And most importantly, we need to give hope. History shows us that Afghan women have also always resisted oppression. They have great deal of resilience, and they have worked and risen strong. And they are not asking for charity, they are demanding solidarity. And I want to leave you only with this, that Afghan women and girls are not alone. Their courage inspires us to act together. And we can create a future where voices are not silenced and they are celebrated. And the fact is that the history has shown us even the most entrenched system of oppression can be reformed when people unite with knowledge and faith and action, by learning from others and supporting Afghan women. We can push back against the misuse of religion and create pathways to justice. And what is really so clear is that what what Taliban is doing is not sustainable. It's not really rational. And it comes from an absolute fear of women, of excluding them from public space. And this has never been part of the Afghan culture. This has never been part of the Islamic tradition. Education is so important. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is why they are doing? What are they gaining? Who are they pleasing? What are their constituencies, and how we can engage with those constituencies? Because most of the time with Taliban, I must say that we need to admit that there is also difference of opinion within the Taliban. We can't say that all these people who are part of Taliban are thinking in the same way. They are different. And those who are more reasonable, those who can understand that in 21st century, you cannot ban education. And the last decree is that women cannot study as medical. Even as gynecologists and midwives, that does not make sense, how they are going to deal with the problem. So I think I want to end here, but I don't want to end on a depressing. There is always a way out. And it takes time. And we are together, and we need to build that solidarity and not to leave Afghan women. I say this as an Iranian woman who has lived under a different form of Islamic Republic. but much, much better than Taliban. You know, there is no comparison in the world with what Taliban is. Thank you. I end here and leave it back to you, Shafiqa Jan,
Thank you,
to engage
Professor.
in a conversation.
Thank you, Professor. We are receiving a lot of questions, and I will be trying my best to take as much questions as possible. This session is also recorded, and you can listen to Musawah's YouTube channel later on. And also, there is Pashto and Dari interpretation available. When you're listening to interpretation, please mute the original audio so you can listen it without noise. I would like to hear from, so Professor Mustafa mentioned about consultation of women during the early days of Islam. Women were consulted, women were part of political processes, peace processes. And Nazifa Jan, this is also in somehow historically part of our culture. Women were always, at least the elite women were always part of the political processes, the peace process and ceasefires, usually when there were wars between two tribes. So when a woman would intervene, both tribes had to agree to the ceasefire in respect to the women. And before the Taliban took over, in the last 2 decades, women had tremendously advanced their rights. The women were in parliament, passing laws. Women were ministers, doctors, journalists, and diplomats. We had quite a vibrant country full of colorful and brilliant minds with all the diversity. And somehow Taliban, with these restrictions, apart from justifying it with an Islamic, according to them, they also say this is not in alliance with Afghan culture. And some other countries and some other groups might also say, like, Afghan culture, very patriarchal, this is tribal people, they do that. As an Afghan woman, how do you, what this resembles the Afghan culture with the current oppressions? How do you find that? If you can answer that very shortly, and then we will come back, ask more questions from other speakers as well.
Thank you, Shafiqa Jan, for sharing this important question, because the Taliban, they abuse the cultural issues also in Afghanistan, and they think like the people of Afghanistan, they are against education, they are against women's participation in politics and other activities, but no, it's not true. I worked in 34 provinces of Afghanistan, and at the moment also I have my networks inside Afghanistan in 34 provinces of Afghanistan, in 360 districts of Afghanistan. You know, the people, they don't want, when I'm talking with them, what do you need? They're not thinking about money. They're not thinking about economic poverty. They're not asking for food. They're asking for school. They're asking for their daughters' work rights. You know, when I established my madrasa in Zabul province, the people, it was 2015. I traveled in different districts under control of the Taliban. You know, Haq Afghan, it was one of the most far districts in Zabul province and completely under control of the Taliban. But the people, they asked for schools, they asked for madrasas. So I can say, if we can read the political history of Afghanistan and the culture story of Afghanistan, we had Malala, the hero women in Afghanistan. We had Rabi Balkhi. We have thousands of Afghan women that they had full participation in politics, in cultural, in society. They had a big role. In Afghanistan, we have a tradition that if two families have problem between themselves, and it's not there is no availability for solve this problem, so one of the women, they can ask for salvation of this problem. You know, so the Taliban, they abuse the culture. They have just excuses. It's not true in Afghanistan. We have a beautiful culture, Islamic culture and Afghan culture. My brothers, every time they supported me. In some provinces of Afghanistan, in some districts, we have the problems. And it's also because of lack of the legal awareness, lack of the public awareness, lack of the access to education. But most of the people, most of the women of Afghanistan today, they know their rights. They have information about Islam. They have information about their Islamic rights, about their human rights, about their basic rights.
Thank you, Nazifa Jan. It's always not the cultures are always, societies are unjust to some people, but the problem is when these unjust and discrimination become a systematic and part of policies that eventually become a law. And this is what the problem in Afghanistan, that everything is so programmed and systematic that it is now a part of the policies and laws and the governing system. Professor Zeba, when I announced this webinar on my Instagram, and then people would reach out and say, like, why do you talk about this issue? The Taliban already know about Islam, and are you going to teach them anything new or something like that? But why do you think it is important to speak about human rights, women's rights from an Islamic perspective? Why it matters?
I think the core problem is that there is a total misperception and misunderstanding of Islam. And many people think that a Taliban version of Islam and what Taliban is saying is Islam. But we need to ask, who's Islam? What interpretation of Islam? And the Quran is not a book of law. It is open to interpretations. And there is a great difference between Sharia and fiqh. Fiqh, which is the science of Islamic jurisprudence and the laws and all this sort of thing. And there is a tendencies among the women groups and many people that to put all the blame on Islam and think that what Taliban is doing is Islamic. And I think this is so important that we need to unlearn that what they are doing is not Islamic. It is patriarchy. It is authoritarianism. It is misogyny. Why can't we name it for what it is? Why the name of Islam? You know, how can it be justified on Islam? And also for women's rights groups, you know, they think that human rights is panacea. They have all the answers in that. But the fact is that nothing is panacea. As I said, faith is so important. Our culture is so important, and our knowledge. And we really need to bring them together. It is important to talk about Islam because we need to challenge this policies, this treatment of women, this mistreatment of women in the name of Islam. And what enables Taliban to do that is naked power. They have the tools of power, and it has happened because of modern nation state. Now, they have in modern nation state, they can decide on what law is. They can impose the law, and they can impose the law in the name of Islam. And they can impose patriarchy in the name of Islam. That is why it is important to challenge it in the name of Islam. And also they attack human rights because they say it is a Western idea. It is something that imposed on us. But at the same time, they claim that Islam is justice. But what justice? Whose justice? I think it is important. And it is, as a women's rights activist, as a human being, we need, if we live in a Muslim context, we need to educate ourselves about our religion. Why? Because you cannot separate religion from culture. And religion is so much intertwined with our cultural beliefs. And you, Shafiqa Jan, you talked about Afghan culture, and we know what a poetic, beautiful culture is. And Nazifa talked about it and her own work. And you two are here examples of Afghan women. So there is hope. Why? I think partly is that it's the fear and also the misconception of what Islam is. And this misconception needs to be challenged. And in fact, the very existence of Musawah, why Musawah came into existence was because we felt that there was a gap between human rights activists and Muslim tradition and Muslim faith. And we, in Musawah, we are bringing them together. We are bringing scholarship with knowledge together, and we produce knowledge, and we produce that knowledge. That said, I don't blame people who feel like this, because many Iranians, put all the blame of what is happening in Iran on Islam. But in fact, it is the way that Islam used as an ideology. And it is the way that Islam used as silencing people. And because we as Muslims have never been able to have access to that knowledge, we just accept what people tell us.
Exactly.
And we only think that men and clerics know about Islam. I tell you, what does Taliban know about Islam? Can they read Arabic properly? Can they understand the Quran? How can they call them alim? The alim in the past, the scholar was well-versed in all sources of knowledge. And there is a lot of work to do, but the work has started already, and we need to work. And I think we need to engage people in a conversation and always start with this question: who is Islam? What Islam? Because you can say the same thing about human rights. Who is human rights? Who is feminism? In the name of human rights and feminism, the more atrocities have been done. In the name of Islam and all religions, atrocities have been done. So we need to separate these policies from the essence of a religion.
Thank you very much. And in your remarks, you mentioned the role of our alim and the clerks and the mullah and the mufti and Professor Mustafa. And there is also a question I think one of the audience asked, and also comes to our mind occasionally, and since especially when the Taliban took over. Well, first of all, this is the only narrative. The Taliban's narrative is the only narrative that is heard in Afghanistan. We do not have an alternative narrative, whether it's from Islamic perspective or Afghan culture or any kind. They are the only one who is speaking to the people, and the Afghan people who are mostly uneducated, who are mostly, I don't know, living under this oppression, are listening to them. What is the role of Islamic ulama, the Afghan Islamic ulama, and in a broader context, what they should do? Can they have an influence? What is their responsibility in this critical time?
Yeah, thank you for that very good question, Shafiqa. There's everything that should make the global ummah very, very concerned about what is happening in Afghanistan at the hands of the Taliban. And Muslim scholars who are silent on this are nothing less than complicit in the destruction and in the dehumanization of our women in Afghanistan, the women of the Ummah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi, fa in lam yastati' فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان." He said that whoever among you sees an evil, whoever among you sees an evil, then let him.
Okay, I can't talk to you right now. I'm sorry.
I think there's some noise in the background. Sorry, there's a Susan. I can hear a voice.
Susan, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Yeah, please. Sorry.
So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever among you sees an evil, then he must change it with his hand. And if he's unable to change it with his hand, then with his tongue. And if he's unable to change it with his tongue, then with his heart. And that's the lowest level, the lowest degree of faith. Now, this hadith is for the everyday believer. All right, so there's nobody who's excused from giving a response in the face of evil. But for the ulama, my view, my belief is that they don't have that third option of keeping it in their heart. They only have one of two options, and that's either to change the situation of evil with their hands or for them to speak out with their tongues. And in other traditions from the Prophet, we know that one of the greatest jihads is to speak out against the oppressor, because of the course of the harm that will befall one who's in that situation of less power in the face of power, the vulnerability that that situation creates. And so the Prophet described it as one of the greatest jihads. So for me, I see this as nothing less than a turning away, a dereliction of duty on behalf of those scholars who are silent, who are turning their heads away. And honestly, we will see this as nothing less than cowardice and hypocrisy. They wouldn't have this for their own women. In fact, there are reports that suggest that some Taliban leaders have allowed their daughters to pursue education abroad in places like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, where educational opportunities for girls and women are not restricted. This has caused frustration and confusion among Afghans living under the Taliban's strict policies, as women and girls in Afghanistan, as we know, are largely banned from attending schools and universities. Beyond the age, grade 6, girls are being banned. And so this is hypocrisy, okay? And so this has to be challenged. Scholars are not just silent on this. They're silent on the oppression of Muslims as an ummah. So when we talk about Islamophobia, the scholars are also silent about that. They're silent about the destruction and the harm and the violence that's done to every Muslim, man and woman. But of course, it's doubly worse when they're silent about the violence and the harm that's done to the most vulnerable of the ummah.
Thank you, Professor. We have 30 minutes left. You can send us more questions, and I will be trying my best to ask as many questions as possible. Nazifa Jan, as Professor Mustafa talked about the role of Islamic scholars, and then there was a question from one of the participants who said, like, what is the responsibility of Muslim countries, what they should do? Because Afghanistan right now is the only country in the world, including Muslim countries, that women and girls are banned from school, work, and public life.
Yeah, thank you, Shafiqa Jan. First of all, I want to say that the role of Islamic scholars is very important. Not only men scholars, but women scholars as well. In Afghanistan, as I experienced, I'm working with male and female ulamas, that we have two types of ulamas. The one are educated ulama. They know the translation of Quran. They know the tafsir of hadith in Quran. In the second part, they are, for example, their father was a religious, and because of his father background, he is also saying like, I'm a religious scholar. But he don't have any information about Islam. He don't know the translation of the Quran. That's why the Taliban can abuse those type of peoples. Anyways, I emphasize that the role of female ulamas and educated ulamas are very important in Afghanistan, in all the world, but especially in Afghan society. About the question that our brother asked, I can say instrumental use of Islam to justify oppression and injustice, especially in Afghanistan, not only contradicts basic human principles, but also goes against the true teachings of Islam due to national interests and political pressure. Many of Muslim countries are unable to adopt a unified stance against human rights violations and against the Taliban's actions inside Afghanistan. These countries often prioritize their internal interests, even if it means remaining silent in the face of injustice. It is important to emphasize that Islam has never endorsed the oppression of women or the violation of human rights. In this regard, Islamic countries must remain committed to both human and Islamic principles and raise their voices collectively against the misuse of religion to ensure the protection of women's rights, particularly the rights to education and work, which is very important for women, especially inside Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazifa Jane. Professor Zeba, there is an interesting question, and I would like to hear from you. One of the participants asked, do you think that the Taliban would be willing to debate over their interpretation of Islam and Sharia law with the Afghan women at any point in the future? And furthermore, you see the Afghan narrative justified by Muslim men in the West too. That's another phenomena, that people living in the West, men and women, would be justifying the Taliban's oppression in Afghanistan, but they will not be willing to live there or send their daughters to live there. This is a common, I would say, sickness.
No, there is Taliban and authoritarian people. They never want to debate in public. And therefore, there is no way to debate with them. And I think for women to debate with them is a waste of time. And first of all, it would be the dialogue of the conversation of the deaf. But debating in public, I would say it is important. If we want to engage with Taliban, we engage with their policies, with their ethics in public. And if someone from the Taliban is willing to come, yes, let people listen to the justification and arguments of both sides. And then they can choose. And the very fact that groups like Taliban and certain ulama are never willing to debate because they don't want to say this openly. Because they cannot say that, they are against education of women. Taliban's excuse is that we are opening the way. We are making the society moral so women can come. But that implies that the society is already immoral. And what makes the society moral is absence of women. Whereas, if I were a man, I would have been absolutely insulted. Because, they think of men as, just sexual animal. That the moment that the woman is the public space, the problem starts. So that is the mindset that we need to challenge. But I believe in conversation. I believe in conversation and in dialogue. And when you have a dialogue with someone, you need to listen to that person, to their reasoning, and also present your reasoning. You might not, you are not there to change their mind. You are there to understand their logic. And I think for us as a women's rights activists and scholars, it is important to understand how Taliban think and why they think this way. you know, the reason that they think this way, it has political reasons. And it has to do with years of war, with invasion, and as well as invasion by Soviet at that time, and then later of invasion by Americans. So it has really deep-rooted. And somehow they are cut off from their women, from the culture and things like this. So a short answer is we can, I don't think that they will be willing to debate with us, but that doesn't stop us from being open to them. And debate can be done in writing. The debate can be done, you know, taking their policies into pieces and looking at the rational and the cultural rational, the mindset behind it. And yes, because if we don't have a conversation, the other route is to have a fight. And we don't, there is no way that you can fight with Taliban. But we can have a conversation and open space and change minds.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Professor Mustafa, there is a question about the use of the Taliban's interpretation of some of the hadith that they mentioned and justifying allowing education for girls based on need, and sometimes like claiming that the environment is not according to Sharia, or basically this question means that when the Taliban are citing from Islamic sources and offering their interpretation, how do you justify that? I wish we had an exact example that would have made it easier for you, but I would like to hear short from you. What would you respond?
So I'm not aware of any of the specific hadith that the Taliban are using to justify which disciplines or subjects that they think women should be able to study, and which they are on the basis of need. My understanding is that they currently are not allowing women to study anything above the age of year 6 or from high school onwards. And the argument I've seen is one of logistics, that they don't have currently an ability to segregate the sexes in education, and then therefore they're prioritizing, you know, men and boys. Which in itself is not justified at all by the Sharia. In fact, anyone with any understanding of Sharia in such a situation where it's a logistic difficulty, one sex or another has to be taught, you would prioritize the women, because their training in, let's just give one example, in the medical sciences is absolutely imperative for them to become doctors and to provide the medical services for the women folk. So you would prioritize women in a situation if you're going to prioritize anybody. This argument of logistics they've been making now for as long as they've been in power. And so actually it has no basis. It's an excuse. And actually what they're doing is from the playbook that they have had, and they were doing exactly the same thing in 1996 until 2001. It's a repeat, like Groundhog Day, of what was happening then in terms of the oppression of women. And so it has got nothing to do with any situational circumstances. These are excuses. Ultimately, there's no real interest from what I can see in affording women the right to education. This is simply about denying the right of education to women and making it easier for them then to remain unchallenged by women folk who would go on and become educated and then challenge the patriarchy that they are imposing. All right, so then there are men who are being educated. Well, then they have to stand up, you know, you know, just because there are not voices of women, where are the voices of the men standing up and saying that this is wrong? It's a responsibility on Afghan men to do this while the women are in the situation that they're in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For our non-Afghan participants, I would like to mention that schools up to grade 12, which is high school, were segregated even before the Taliban took over in Afghanistan. And we had a black uniform that we used to wear. And in terms of logistics, the international community, especially the UN agencies like UNICEF, promised that they will pay the salaries of the teachers. And so but the Taliban are still not reopening schools for girls. A lot of the things that are claimed that they're gonna bring to the, I don't know, in Sharia law or providing this Islamic environment had been already existed in Afghanistan. I went to the same school, and I know Nazifa Jan may call it, may also remember. There is another question, Nazifa Jan, I would like to ask, to put it to you. The person also asked me is about the influence of Saudi Arabia and their ulamas, how Afghan perceive them. What is their perspective about that? I would like shortly to hear about that. And as an Afghan woman, how important it is to discuss women's rights in the Afghan context from an Islamic perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shafiqa Jan. As you know, the Taliban, they also bold just the Islamic reasons that because of Islam, we, for example, have these restrictions against women. It's really important to discuss these important issues on perspective of Islam. It is important to promote and to have dialogue in different Islamic countries for Afghanistan women's rights. But unfortunately, inside Afghanistan, it's not important. It's not like acceptable for the Taliban, because the Taliban never accept the Islamic countries, for example, the ulamas from Saudi Arabia, from other Islamic countries, for example, from Indonesia. Actually, they had some meetings with the Taliban. They sent their suggestions, some of the ulamas groups and some of the ulamas networks. They had their recommendations and their suggestions to the Taliban. They had their discussions with the Taliban. But the Taliban, because of their political power, they did not accept the recommendations and the dialogue that they had with the ulamas from outside Afghanistan, because it was not acceptable for them.
Mm-hmm.
And also about these type of discussions, as I said before, the role of female ulamas. It's, I think, very important to have the dialogues between the people, even between the females inside Afghanistan, because in some provinces, in some districts, the women, they think like the Taliban are right. So it's important to have the opportunity through social media. If any of us, we know only one ayah from Quran, we should write it on our social media platforms. We should organize conferences, workshops. It's online, it's in person, it's not important. In every way, we can organize these type of discussions, these type of dialogues. It will be useful for Afghan society, because it's really important. In Afghanistan, when the Taliban saying, for example, there is in Islam, it's not allowed for girls to go outside, to go to school. We should say, like Allah in Quran say directly that the someone that have education, or someone is educated, or someone is not educated, they are not equal. The darkness in the day and the night, it's not equal.
Exactly.
So that's why it's really important to have these type of dialogues, these type of workshops, these type of conferences, but unfortunately we are facing with the lack of financial support, with the lack of opportunity as well. At the moment, our female educated religious scholars inside Afghanistan, in the male educated scholars inside Afghanistan, they have their plans, they have their concepts to talk with the people, to talk with the mullah imams, to talk with the Taliban, because between the Taliban, they're not agree with each other. Some the Taliban commanders, they believe on girls' education. They believe on human dignity, because Allah directly say in Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. But some of the Taliban, they don't believe on this ayah.
Thank you, Nazifa Jane. We are at the end of the webinar, but I would like to ask this question, Professor Zeba. Its question often came to my mind as an Afghan woman who is advocating for women's rights in Afghanistan, though I live outside of Afghanistan, is when you're fighting against someone, you have to know them very well, maybe sometimes more well than yourself. But when I often think about the Taliban, I think about the way they are trained in that specific madrasas. They came out of the curriculum that was designed for them to have that kind of mentality, the way they're programmed. It maybe, as you've mentioned during your speech, that they are kind of like became stranger to their own culture and their own societies. They were away, they were trained in this environment which was designed to create a Talib. Then as an Afghan woman or Afghan people, all of us, scholars, internationals, Muslims, non-Muslims, especially Muslims, how do we make them unlearn what they learned? How do we redesign this mentality?
It is very difficult question. Yes. I think they went through a trauma because they were separated from their families, their context, and they were drilled in this. And they are the product of the war and also foreign policies. You know, foreign policies made this possible. So we must not forget that American foreign policies, European foreign policies, and before that, the rivalry between Soviet Union and the West, you know, created an ambience for that. I think, you know, the fact is that they will change gradually, but at the same time, what we need to put, I really don't know, because I think they were traumatized. And they were traumatized and they come from a deep fear because what they are doing is not normal. And nobody has been close to them and talked about them because they have a very hierarchical system. And the hierarchical system is that what the leader decides and says, everybody has to agree, even pretend to agree, even they know that it is wrong. So gradually things might change, but I think what we need now to focus is on building our own capacity and promoting the dialogue among ourselves and creating alternative venues for women to get education, to get access to education, because we need, the world needs to give them what the Taliban has denied them. And that is the focus. And at the same time, I agree with Nafisa. There are scholars in Afghanistan. They are very progressive and reform-minded scholars. I'm Iranian. I read, I share the same culture in language with Dari. So I read their material, and they are really, really broad-minded, and they are women scholars as well. And we need to create collaboration among ourselves and find the ways of creating solidarity. One way is to have discussion groups that women talk among, read a text, read a book, talk about it, about religion, and open our minds. And that is one way, but at the same time, we can't leave men behind. Include men in that, because they are our partners. And so I think what is the most important is to know your enemy, to know your terrain, what are fighting about, what are the situations that you are fighting about, and to know your weakness and strength. We know our weakness, that we lack power, we lack voice, but we know our strength. We have commitment, we have solidarity, and God is with us. Because what we are doing is just and in line with Islam.
Thank you very much. I think this is the most important point in fighting for justice, is to know your enemy, to know your context, know your audience, know your allies who is really with you. Professor Mustafa, I would like to hear your final remarks, but also if you can also touch on the point which I really wanted to bring it up in this webinar, was that the way the Taliban's government or administration works is that the one person who is the leader is giving a farman. Sometimes it's even verbal, but that eventually become the whole policy of the government, and no one can go against that. What is that such a system in Islam? What is the place of such a system in Islam? And I would like to hear from you that. And also, as far as I always read about Muslim leader, justice is one of the things that is always mentioned for almost a condition for a Muslim leader to be a just. I would like to hear these two, and with your final remarks.
Thank you, Shafiqa. That second part of your question, I think I'll go for to begin with, and that is that there is no precedent really for so much power to be vested, religious, legal, political power to be vested in a single person, at least within our Islamic tradition. There's always been a separation of powers within the long history of Islam. And in fact, the Caliph or the Amir and the supreme leader of the Taliban, and calls himself the Amir al-Mu'mineen. Well, caliphs and emirs of the past, they were equally answerable and accountable to the law, the Sharia. And that was a law that was produced by the ulama, men and women, that were separate from and could hold to account the political authorities. And so what's happening in Afghanistan, what the Taliban are doing, there is no precedent for. And you'll never expect, even if somebody is just, for how long are they going to be just? So those kinds of characteristics, they're not enough to safeguard a society from an individual who, will misuse power or not. And so that's from the kind of Islamic legal perspective, I would say. I think it's so important that we do speak and we do debate and we do challenge intellectually everything that's happening there. But I think as scholars, as academics, I think we should offer every support that we can to the women and the men in Afghanistan. Let's give them the knowledge that they need. The internet now, Al Jazeera have done a report that the women now who are confined to their houses, do not have access to education, are learning online. Let's give them the knowledge. We have access to them. Let's find and create the infrastructure to do that, like we are doing for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. There are academics now who are providing them with education and teaching in the absence of a higher education system, which has been completely destroyed Well, let's do that for our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan as well. That would be my appeal to our scholarly community of men and women.
Thank you very much. Nazifa Jan, your final remarks very shortly, please. Thank you. You are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's perfect. I just have three recommendations. First of all, building chosen among female scholars. This can be implemented by women's organizations, educational organizations, and community leaders by creating networks, forums, or conferences that bring female scholars together to share ideas and collaborate. And also rising Islamic and legal awareness for women from an Islamic perspective, avoiding stereotypical approaches, and also encouraging and fostering coordination with female scholars from various Islamic countries. I think it's the most important one. That international NGOs and academic institutions and also religious organizations can facilitate exchange programs, virtual collaborations, and regional conferences to strengthen bonds and share best practices among female scholars across the Islamic world. So that's it. I hope one day we will go back to Afghanistan and work without any excuse, especially without any abuses of Islam, especially because we love our religion. And myself, I learned freedom of expression from Islam. I learned the humanity. I learned the human dignity. I learned everything. My freedom. I learned everything from Islam. So I in the madrasa that was closed by the Taliban. I hope one day I will be able to establish again my madrasa and reopen again my madrasa inside Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. Professor Zeba, your final remarks.
I don't have much to add. I think, you know, what Nafisa said and Dr. Mustafa said, to build our knowledge, use the facilities that we have, the internet and collaboration with different groups, and also engage in scholarship. There is now a body of very progressive, very egalitarian scholarship. And this scholarship needs to be shared. It is not only produced by modernists, it is even produced by traditionalists, because they understand the time of has changed. You know, justice is the essence of every law in Islam. But justice is time-bound and context-bound. What it meant to be just at the time of the Prophet was very different than what it means to be just in our time. And we need to understand the Quran. We need to understand the practice of the Prophet in their own context, and also take the lessons, take the moral lessons, and build laws that are based on that. And our biggest enemy is authoritarianism and combined with patriarchy, with male dominance. And also the naked power, as I said, they use the power and silence people. And but we mustn't give up hope. And as I said, you know, never all these dictators, all these misogynist groups have existed forever. They will change.
Thank you very much, everyone who participated, who listened, who shared their brilliant questions and comments in the chat sections. I tried my best to take as much questions as possible. There are some wonderful resources shared by our our colleagues. You can also have access to that. There's also a joint statement by Afghan and some international organizations on the rollback of Afghan women on the human rights, on the International Day of Human Rights. You can also listen to this session again and again. And some of the participants asked for the guests' email addresses. You can send an email to either Rawadari, Femena, or Musawah, which emails are already shared. We will ask our guests if they're comfortable to share their emails with you, and we will definitely reach out to you back. And then some ask for Professor Mustafa's speech. We will also figure that out. How can we share that with you all as well? Please do keep this conversation alive. Keep Afghan women in your thoughts, in your prayers, and wherever you go, speak about them. Talk with your policymakers, with the scholars, every way that you can. Share it on social media. Thank you very much. I really, really hope that one day we will live in a just and peaceful world. Goodbye.
Inshallah, and goodbye.
Goodbye.